Chapter 9. Ambient Encroachment and Tacit Contracts. Only a virtuous people are capable of freedom. As nations become corrupt and vicious, they have more need of masters. Benjamin Franklin. Dear Chris, in this letter I'll try to clear up 2 points that can lead to confusion. The first concerns something we might call ambient encroachment, meaning the surrounding level of encroachment. Most communities permit a small amount of encroachment. This is an amount widely accepted as tolerable or necessary. You can phone someone between the hours of, say, 9 a.m. and 9 p.m., or you can stroll up their front walk and knock on their door. But don't phone them at 3 a.m. or tramp through their flower beds. If you exceed the ambient level of encroachment, you'll owe them for the inconvenience or damage you've caused. Some individuals permit more encroachment than others. One person may not mind if strangers knock on their back door. Another may want strangers to come only to her front door. The safest course is to always err on the side of caution. If you must encroach, be as polite and unintrusive as possible. Try to see it from the other person's point of view. Your own privacy, peace, and quiet are important to you, so don't disrupt someone else's. Do unto others. Also, never touch another person or his property unless you are sure you have his permission. Give him space. He will trust you more and be more friendly and helpful as soon as he realizes you are trying not to encroach. I've been around the world and in the company of all kinds of people, from scientists and jet pilots to the most primitive jungle Indians. This works everywhere. The second point to clear up is that of unspoken contracts. An agreement does not need to be in writing to be binding. Most contracts are unspoken, or tacit. If you walk into a grocery store to buy a candy bar, numerous tacit contracts are in force. The first is from the fact that the door is open. By leaving the door open, the owner is agreeing to allow you to come in, as long as you don't do any harm. He hasn't said this to you directly. It's understood, and it's binding. The next contract concerns the candy. You are permitted to pick it up and examine it, but not damage it or move it to another location. The owner has not said this to you directly, but it's understood, or customary, and it's binding. You decide to buy this candy and take it to the register. You lay it on the counter, and the clerk rings it up. You give the money to the clerk, pick up the candy, and leave the store. All this has happened without a word spoken, but a complex agreement has been executed, and it's binding. The store owner has guaranteed that the candy is what the wrapper says it is. It's sugar, not salt, almonds, not peanuts, and it won't poison you. On your side of this tacit agreement, you are guaranteeing that the money you hand over is the type and amount the owner would reasonably expect. The quarters are genuine U.S. coins, not foreign coins, or slugs, or anything else of lesser value. Why quarters for a candy bar today when I paid a nickel when I was a kid? Do you remember the economics you learned through our prior letters? Again, most contracts are unspoken, but they can be very complex, containing numerous guarantees you don't even think about. These guarantees are binding. To have the best chance of getting the most for your money, get into the habit of asking yourself before every large purchase, exactly what am I agreeing to, and what is the other party agreeing to? What are we guaranteeing to each other? When dealing with friends, bear in mind that friends tend to give each other the benefit of the doubt when something goes wrong. They are less inclined to defend their interests than they are in cases where they are dealing with strangers. This can lead to hard feelings and shattered relationships because a friend can feel he is getting the short end of the stick if something goes wrong. So, the more you care about a friend, the more careful you should be about clearly stating all parts of any agreement you have with him, especially parts that answer the question, what if something goes wrong? The best way to handle misunderstandings is to prevent them. In making any agreement with a friend, you might want to follow the example of the old common law. Specify that if a dispute arises, you will choose a third party acceptable to you both. You will each tell your side of the story to this third party, and you each agree to abide by whatever decision the third party makes. Another point, your word should be your bond, and you should try to cultivate a reputation for this. It will be one of your most valuable possessions and will open up opportunities that are not available to others who have reputations for being untrustworthy. In other words, honesty can be profitable. People will pay extra to deal with someone they are sure is reliable. Do all you have agreed to do. Neither the wisest constitution nor the wisest laws will secure the liberty and happiness of a people whose manners are universally corrupt. Samuel Adams. I will finish this letter by mentioning a survival tactic. You've probably noticed that someone who encroaches in small ways may be inclined to encroach in large ways. Similarly, a person who will break agreements in small ways may be inclined to major fraud. Before getting into any kind of close personal or business relationship, observe how the person behaves in minor situations. If he shows the slightest inclination to encroach or fudge on agreements, he may be a thug who will hurt you seriously if he thinks he can get away with it. Try to develop an internal alarm. When you see someone break an agreement or encroach beyond the ambient level, your alarm should alert you. Look out! Someone who will do that might do anything. The best people to deal with are those who are very reluctant to encroach, and who are careful to always give all they have agreed to. Uncle Eric. Definitions of fraud and agreement. Fraud. An intentional perversion of truth for the purpose of inducing another, in reliance upon it, to part with some valuable thing belonging to him, or to surrender a legal right. A false representation of a matter of fact, whether by words or by conduct, by false or misleading allegations, or by concealment of that which should have been disclosed, which deceives and is intended to deceive another, so that he shall act upon it to his legal injury. Any kind of artifice employed by one person to deceive another. Black's Law Dictionary. Agreement. A concord of understanding and intention between two or more parties with respect to the effect upon their relative rights or benefits, with the view of contracting an obligation, a mutual obligation. Black's Law Dictionary. Thomas Jefferson's maxims for the conduct of a young man. 1. Never spend your money before you have it. 2. Never buy what you don't want because it is cheap. It will be dear to you. 3. Pride costs more than hunger, thirst, and cold. 4. Never put off tomorrow what you can do today. 5. Never trouble another for what you can do yourself. 6. Think as you please and let others do so. You will then have no disputes. 7. How much pain have cost us the things which have never happened? 8. Take things away by their smooth handle. 9. When angry, count to 10 before you speak. If very angry, 100. 10. When at a table, remember that we never repent of having eaten or drunk too little. Chapter 10. Economic Calculation. Dear Chris, do all you have agreed to do, and do not encroach on other persons or their property. These two fundamental laws have been more widely obeyed in America by everyone, including government officials, than anywhere else. So America became the most advanced nation ever seen on Earth. Not until the 1970s did this advancement slow. The reason these two fundamental laws create a progressive civilization with increasing abundance for all is something economists call economic calculation. It sounds complicated, but it's not. Here's how it works. Suppose I offer to sell you something, say, a pen, for $5. I will do so only if I want the $5 more than the pen. You will agree to the trade only if you want the pen more than the $5. In a free trade, both parties end up with something they value more than what they traded away. Otherwise, they would not go to the trouble of trading. In transactions of trade, it is not to be supposed that, as in gaming, what one party gains the other must necessarily lose. The gain to each may be equal. If A has more corn than he can consume, but wants cattle, and B has more cattle, but wants corn, exchange is gain to each. Thereby the common stock of comforts in life is increased. Benjamin Franklin, 1706 to 1790, Signer, Declaration of Independence. Therefore, in a free trade, both parties have profit. Both have their lives slightly improved. The sum of all the profits from all the free trades in a society is what we call progress. Free trade is the source of progress. This is economic calculation in action. Humans produce and trade only when they think it will yield something they want more than the time, money, effort, and other factors required for the production and trade. A key word here is think. Economic calculation is difficult. We sometimes make mistakes. Trades occasionally yield accidental losses. We have all had the experience of doing some kind of work or making a purchase that has us saying, "I wish I hadn't done that. It wasn't worth it." Economic calculation is difficult, and some transactions yield losses. But as long as both parties come to a transaction voluntarily, we know chances are good it will yield gains for both. Civilization will move slightly ahead. Chris, I should point out here that this is a bit of an oversimplification. Not all profits bring advancement in the sense of being better off today than yesterday. Here's why. Things break down and wear out. They get used up. Ask your parents about the cost of auto repairs and food, and you'll know what I'm talking about. Much profit goes toward just staying even, toward avoiding decline. So only a portion of our profits goes toward genuine progress. We need a certain amount of profit just to keep from sliding back into the dark ages. But to keep things simple, I'll continue speaking in terms of any profit being progress. Besides, it's true in a sense. Throughout history, most of mankind has lived in grinding poverty most of the time. If any of our ancestors had seen how we live now, they'd have thought heaven on earth had been achieved. To them, merely staying where we are would be more than anyone could reasonably wish for. Just bear in mind that when I speak of any profit being progress, I'm simplifying to make my explanations easier to grasp. In my next letter, we'll see what happens to economic calculation when someone violates the two fundamental laws. Until then, remember that free trade is the source of progress. In a free trade, both parties end up with something they value more than what they traded away. Otherwise, they wouldn't go to the trouble of trading. Uncle Eric. Do you know anyone old enough to remember the before time? When men walked on the moon. As I write this, the last moon mission was launched in 1972. When home ownership was a realistic possibility for most American families. When the typical middle-class family could get ahead with only one person working outside the home. When real wages, adjusted for inflation, rose continually. When the normal unemployment was only 3 to 4%. When poverty was declining. When good job opportunities were common. When stress was something engineers studied. When single-parent households were unusual. When most high school students could read. When narcotic addiction was almost unknown. When you rarely saw a person who was homeless or hungry. When you could leave your doors unlocked at night. When it was automatically assumed that each generation of Americans would eventually live better than their parents. Recessions aside, The U.S. economy since about 1973 has been suffering from a slowly debilitating disease. Growth in productivity has dropped. The competitiveness of industry has declined. The once steady rise in living standards has faltered, and wages have stagnated. Most Americans tell pollsters that they doubt their children's generation will live as well as they do. The American dream is fading. Alan Murray, Outlook, Wall Street Journal, December 2nd, 1991. Chapter 11. Force or Fraud. Dear Chris, suppose someone introduces force into the transaction. Suppose a third party, a government, or a criminal, it does not matter, says you must purchase the pen, even if it is not worth $5 to you. If you don't, you will be punished. We can expect this trade to still yield a profit for me because I participate voluntarily, but we cannot expect this for you. For you, the pen may be worth only $4, or it may be worth nothing at all. Perhaps you do not need it. So, the trade may cause you a loss. When the two fundamental laws are not obeyed, when force or fraud enter a transaction, odds are that at least one party will suffer a loss. Someone will give up something he values more than what he receives in exchange. Civilization will move slightly backward. In a government-controlled economy, force is involved in millions of transactions every day. Anything involving taxes involves force. So millions of transactions yield losses every day. People are continually being forced to give up things they value more than what they get. The presence of force is a near ironclad guarantee of loss. If losses were not happening, these people would go along voluntarily. When the government grows large enough, the losses outnumber the gains, and civilization moves backward. We apparently reached this point sometime in the early 1970s. To summarize, scientific law permits effective economic calculation and progress. Political law, but that's another story we will cover in letters to come. These are the essential facts of economic calculation. They tell us free markets are the source of America's legendary abundance, and they tell us why the two fundamental laws are necessary for an advancing civilization. Chris, until my next letter, remember that in a free trade, chances are good that both parties will profit. Civilization will move slightly ahead. But when force or fraud enters the transaction, chances are that one or both parties will suffer a loss. Civilization will move backward. The loss may be well hidden, but, given enough time, a good economist can spot it. Uncle Eric. Chains of agreements. In a free country, we organize ourselves by chains of agreements. The farmer agrees to sell wheat to the mill. The miller agrees to sell flour to the bakery. The baker agrees to sell buns to the restaurant, and the restaurateur agrees to sell dinner to you and me. Each person is a link in the chain, and all rely on each other. If any one person breaks his agreement, the chain fails, and all end up with less than they need. Chapter 12. The Lawless West. Dear Chris, persons who learn their history from Hollywood movies tend to believe the American West was a land overrun by lawless killers. It sometimes seems the gurus of Tinseltown have spent millions convincing us everything west of the Mississippi was gunfights and outlaws until U.S. Marshals arrived. The truth, of course, is much different and much too tame for a movie. Dodge City and a few other places were wild, but by and large, the West was a peaceful place far less dangerous than most big cities today. It was Little House on the Prairie, not Gunsmoke. Think about it. Why do we recognize the names Jesse James and Black Bart when we do not know the names of the criminals who roam the streets of our cities today? Because Jesse James and Black Bart were unusual. Today, most cities contain hundreds of these thugs, and many are far more bloodthirsty than Jesse James or Black Bart were in their worst nightmares. Life on a frontier is hard work. This is where we find not the worst, but the finest specimens of mankind. Cities are where we find the parasites, because cities are where the parasites find the most victims. The common law tradition holds that there is no such thing as a lawless place. The law exists, just as the laws of physics and chemistry exist. Even if we choose not to learn or follow the law, it is still there producing its inevitable results. Obey the law, and life gets better. Disobey, and life gets worse. It's automatic. The pioneers believed this and lived accordingly. They were law-abiding despite the absence of police. It was ingrained in them. This, more than anything else, is what was once meant by the word American. An American was a person with specific, definable principles. He had character, honor. He obeyed common law even when no police were nearby. Looking outward at the rest of the world, the American saw barbarism, a barbarism caused by the absence of common law principles. The American had made a deliberate, conscious choice to be honorable and civilized. This is how he built the most advanced civilization ever known. Between 1820 and 1940, 38 million people came to America, often risking their lives to do so. They wanted to live under these principles. This is why Americans have always been known as one of the most law-abiding peoples in the world. They chose to be. In most nations, patriotism is a dedication to the homeland, the geographic area. America is different. With the possible exception of Switzerland, America was the first nation ever to be founded on a set of moral principles. Even today, America remains more of an idea than a place. That lump-in-the-throat patriotism inspired by the Liberty Bell or the Statue of Liberty comes as a result of what the country means, not where it is. This also points to one of the most fascinating aspects of common law. It truly is scientifically provable. We can measure the results. The nations in which the two fundamental laws are more widely obeyed by everyone, including government officials, all men are created equal, are those that have higher average incomes, less poverty, less crime, longer lifespans, better health, more literacy, and so forth. By almost any gauge, these nations are better places to live. See for yourself. Where would you rather live? The US or Russia? Switzerland or Ethiopia? New Zealand or Iraq? The early Americans understood this. They were immigrants who had fled poorer nations. To them, the superiority of common law principles was obvious. They had seen with their own eyes that the more political law a nation had, the greater the extremes of wealth and poverty, and the smaller the middle class. Perhaps this gives you a hint of what I'll soon be writing in regard to political law. Early Americans also saw immediate, everyday benefits of following the two fundamental laws. This was expressed in sayings such as, "Honesty is the best policy." French writer and moralist Jean de la Bruyere explained, "A show of a certain amount of honesty is, in any profession or business, the surest way of growing rich." This is because buyers and employers seek honest people. They don't want to get ripped off. In my opinion, in America today, we place far too much emphasis on intelligence and too little on character. Intelligence is great, but only if used in honorable ways. I like George Washington's remark, "I hope I shall always possess firmness and virtue enough to maintain what I consider the most enviable of all titles, the character of an honest man." What do you think Washington would say about computer viruses? These are small programs designed to secretly spread from one computer to another and do damage. They can be written only by a brilliant intellect. Today, hundreds of these viruses are harming millions of innocent people. Virus creators are highly intelligent and highly barbaric. I cannot imagine anything more terrifying than that combination, and I'm afraid it is the wave of the future. If we don't find a way to stop it, it will destroy us, and soon. Please tell others about the 2 fundamental laws. Until my next letter, remember, the 2 fundamental laws are one part of religion, the only part, that is scientifically provable. Where these laws are more widely obeyed, life is better. Uncle Eric. The results of the 2 fundamental laws are scientifically measurable. This is a graph of nations where the laws are most widely obeyed, where the laws are less widely obeyed, and where the laws are least obeyed, and a comparison of their GDP per capita, their male life expectancy, how many telephones there are per person, internet users per household, TVs per household, and infant deaths per 1,000. Starting with the nations where the laws are most widely obeyed: Australia, Canada, Switzerland, and the USA. In Australia, the GDP per capita is 38,100. In Canada, 39,100. In Switzerland, 41,800. And in the USA, 46,900. In countries where the laws are less widely obeyed, such as Mexico, Panama, South Africa, and South Korea, the GDP per capita: Mexico, 14,200. Panama, 11,700. South Africa, 10,100. And South Korea, 27,600. And in nations as an example of where the laws are least obeyed, Ethiopia has a GDP per capita of 800. Pakistan, 2,500. Uganda, 1,300. And Zaire, or Democratic Republic of the Congo, only 300. Now the table for male life expectancy. In Australia, 79.25. In Canada, 78.69. In Switzerland, 78.03. In the USA, 75.65. In Mexico, 73.25. In Panama, 74.47. In South Africa, 49.81. In South Korea, 75.45. In Ethiopia, 52.92. In Pakistan, 63.40. In Uganda, 51.66. And in Zaire, 52.58. Telephones per person. In Australia, 1.46. In Canada, 1.19. In Switzerland, 1.72. In USA, 1.36. In Mexico, 0.79. In Panama, 0.86. In South Africa, 0.96. In South Korea, 1.39. In Ethiopia, 0.02. In Pakistan, 0.53. In Uganda, 0.14. And in Zaire, 0.10. Now for internet users per household. In Australia, 1.37. In Canada, 2.26. In Switzerland, 1.39. And in the USA, 1.89. In Mexico, 0.86. In Panama, 0.64. In South Africa, 0.42. And in South Korea, 2.13. In Ethiopia, 0.02. In Pakistan, 0.68. In Uganda, 0.29. And in Zaire, 0.02. Now for the number of TVs per household. In Australia, 1.86. In Canada, 1.91. In Switzerland, 1.05. And in the USA, 2.19. In Mexico, 1.14. In Panama, 0.79. In South Africa, 0.55. And in South Korea, 1.06. In Ethiopia, 0.03. In Pakistan, 0.71. In Uganda, 0.13. And in Zaire, 0.01. Now for the number of infant deaths per thousand. In Australia, 4.75. In Canada, 5.04. In Switzerland, 4.18. And in the USA, 6.26. In Mexico, 18.42. In Panama, 12.67. In South Africa, 44.42. And in South Korea, 4.26. In Ethiopia, 80.80. In Pakistan, 65.14. In Uganda, 64.82. And in Zaire, 81.21. Notice, citizens in a higher category enjoy several times the wealth of those in the category immediately beneath them. The American and Swiss have nearly 40 times the wealth of persons in the least free nations where poverty and starvation are frequent. In America and Switzerland, economic calculation is less effective than years ago, but it is still working to a large extent. In the least free nations, it has been nearly destroyed. In these nations, force and fraud are everywhere, and the governments are the worst offenders. Notice South Korea's political reforms have been moving it upward. It's not far from Category 1.